Hello and welcome back to another very special episode here at A View from the Bullens with myself, Ben Winstanley, and I'm joined today, delighted to be joined by financial football expert Kieran Maguire, who's going to try and help me dissect what the hell has been going on with Everton and what to expect in the near future. Kieran, a lot of talk about profit and loss sustainability rules that was implemented by the Premier League, which was in fact signed off by over 14 clubs in the Premier League. In layman's terms for the listeners, what do we mean by, we say, PSR, profit and loss sustainability? What does it actually mean?
Okay, in 2013, the Premier League clubs voted to bring in some cost control rules. And under those rules, you are allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years. And that 3 years resets itself every year, so it rolls forward. Now, if you have certain expenditure on what we would classify as good things in football, so you spend money on infrastructure, so the new stadium, that's excluded. You got the academy, that's great. We got kids coming through, that's excluded. Women's team, we want to build up the women's team, that's excluded. The community scheme, Everton in the community, in my view, and I talk to a lot of them, and the people I talk to, Everton in the community is probably the best community scheme in the country in terms of the impact it has on youth, the impact it has on blokes my age who aren't particularly looking after themselves. So that's excluded as well. So you've got this target or this limit of losing £105 million over 3 years. And that's to stop, well, what is it there to stop? Because if you talk to Newcastle fans, they say, well, we can't do what Chelsea did and we can't do what Manchester City did. We can't just go and effectively spend and spend and spend. So it's there to stop another club owner coming in as a disruptor and making that club competitive and taking the Champions League places. And this is what's all driving. It's taking the Champions League places that certain clubs believe are theirs by right rather than winning football matches. So it's nothing fair about it because it doesn't create a level playing field because those clubs with existing financial advantages keep them. It is, in my view, anti-competitive, and if anybody has heard of a guy called Nick DeMarco, who's probably the leading sports lawyer in the country, he said similar last week. So we fall into this trap of thinking it's fair. It's not profitable because it allows clubs to lose money, and if you take the money coming into the club from ticket sales, broadcast, commercial, and you deduct your running costs, that gives you your profit or loss. Clubs are losing money. 18 out of 20 clubs in the Premier League are losing money on that basis, on a day-to-day basis. They might sell a player or two to help get them out of a hole, but if you look at their day-to-day activities, so 18 out of 20, so it's not encouraging profitability, and it's not encouraging sustainability because clubs still work on a short-term basis rather than a long-term. So that's the rules as they stand. They've not changed since 2013, so I'm obsessed with numbers, the financial numbers of football. So I worked out that if you'd taken into account the football wage inflation, and football's your biggest, wages are your biggest cost, that 105 million in 2013 should have been about 216 million by the time we got to 2022, which is the period in which Everton were first assessed. And therefore they've been well within the limits, but nobody seems to have taken this into account.
Do you think, obviously you mentioned that, I was going to touch on the inflation and obviously the cost of football itself, the wages, everything involved. Do you think that's why the Premier League, especially Dick Masters, that we like to call him on this show, he is then obviously getting people together now to now discuss changing the rules, but it just, the timing's a little bit off, isn't it?
The timing is off, and I give him plenty of stick as well when I think he's messed up. In the defence of the Premier League, they are actually following what we're seeing in UEFA. So UEFA used to have a similar set of rules, except instead of £105 million being allowed to be lost, it was €30 million. What UEFA have said is that we're now going to switch to a sort of wage cap. So the Premier League are likely to announce something called a squad cost control cap or something like that. And what that will do is that you will be allowed to spend, if you're qualified for Europe, it will be 70% of wages plus agents' fees plus your net transfer spend or net transfer costs. How we work that out, we'll sort that out. 70% of the money coming into the club can go on players. And that, in theory, will make you more sustainable. And, of course, that is inflation-linked because as more money comes into the club, that 70% of a bigger figure becomes a bigger figure. So, again, it seems harsh that we've not moved forwards for the last 10 years, and now they're introducing a system which is inflation-adjusted.
Touching on Everton and their unique case regarding, obviously, against the Premier League, Everton argued some mitigating circumstances in their arguments. They mentioned stuff of interest rates with regard to the stadium loans and other sorts of mitigating factors. Do you think Everton were unfortunate to obviously get home on these mitigating factors? Because there was a lot, wasn't it, they tried to push?
I think at times they tried to push too hard on some issues, and that lost potentially the credibility for others. If we take the position of the stadium, to me, I don't think they did anything wrong, but it was incompetence and arrogance rather than trying to cook the books, trying to do anything wrong. Under the accounting rules, if you borrow money to build a piece of infrastructure, those interest costs are added on to the cost of the stadium or the skyscraper or the block of offices or whatever it's going to be. And that's standard.
Yeah.
So if that had been the case, that would have been absolutely fine, and none of those costs would be included. And there's also, of course, the case saying Everton have had no sporting advantage from the development of the stadium because the stadium doesn't come on stream until 2025. I think where they shot themselves in the foot was when they initially borrowed the money from Rights and Media Funding and MSD and these other people. They specifically said, we only want to borrow the money to pay for the day-to-day bills, in which case the interest on those loans does go into your PSR calculations. If they'd said, we just want to borrow the money and we are going to use it for the stadium, they would be fine. At the same time, Mr. Mashiri was putting in money into the club interest-free, and that was going into the stadium pot. If you'd reversed those two, I think they would have been in a better position and that much closer to the limit. Now, it does look as if the Premier League has conceded some of that, but not all of it. So there it was. Why somebody should be looking at these again. Was that just complacency? I think the season that they budgeted to finish 6th in the Premier League. Well, I didn't see anything in terms of, well, where's that going to come from? I'm not having a dig at the coach or the manager or the players, and I suspect you as fans, you didn't say at the start of the season, where do we think we're going to finish? Oh, 6th. I think we're all realistic at the start of each season. And they didn't achieve that objective. And the issue with the Premier League, and the Premier League annual report came out last week, is that for each additional position that you are in the Premier League, it's worth £3.1 million. So if Everton had finished 6th, then they wouldn't be on charges. But you don't assume that at the start of the season unless you've got a lot of evidence that there's been a significant increase in the quality of the squad.
In relation to other mitigating factors, there was, Player X, which we won't divulge too much into. We spoke about the sponsorships in regards to USM, the war in Ukraine, the relationship of Farhad Mashiri and the oligarch Usmanov.
Yeah.
Everton tried to push this in the here and they saying it's out of our hands. We didn't expect COVID to come. We didn't expect the war in Ukraine to happen. Would that have had any weight, or is it just simply tough? You need to have contingency plans to sort this type of mess out yourselves?
I don't think you can have a contingency plan for a once-in-a-century global pandemic and the consequences that have. At the same time, it affected every Premier League football club. If you take a look at the level of the claims that other clubs have put in, now, what is your COVID adjustment? Well, first of all, there's the loss of ticket sales. At Goodison Park, Everton don't generate a lot of money. Part of the reason why they're moving to the new stadium is, and I know you've got an emotional attachment to the stadium. I'm a Brighton fan. We used to have our own ground. Can I use bad language here?
Of course you can,
Okay. It was a shithole, but it was our shithole.
It
was always our view. But the facilities were poor, and you've got memories of particular matches. Okay, what I would say, those memories will never leave you. The stadium might not be there, but the memories will always be there. You move to the new stadium, you've got better seats, better view, better concourse. Everything will be better. So that's what I would say to fans. But Goodison, because it didn't have a lot of conferencing and hospitality room, was generating probably less than £1 million a match from ticket sales from match day. You look at clubs. I think, is there another club in this city?
Well, we won't talk. Well, Tranmere's over the wall.
I think there's another club in this city, and they're probably generating around about £4 million a match.
Yeah.
Manchester United are probably getting the thick end of 5. Spurs, and I'm doing a Spurs podcast in the next day or two. They potentially are going to have the biggest revenue generating stadium in the country. If they have a good season, they get to the Champions League, and they've done it from switching the grounds. And I don't know whether you've been to the Spurs stadium. It's incredible.
The best I've ever been.
Yeah,
the best
it is. And it is sort of future-proofing the club, and it's allowing the club to be competitive. So Everton potentially can go from £18 million a year, 16 to £18 million a year from match day to 40 or 50, and that money goes into your budget. But that doesn't come on stream until 2025.
Yeah.
So there's been no advantage. So that does seem very harsh on the club. Everton did sort of claim that they were being hit worse by COVID than other clubs.
I think we had the most losses, didn't we, out of any?
Yeah, and I think they lost a little bit of credibility.
Yeah.
And I know that there's another player who the club said, well, we could have sold him into the continental market for such and such a price, and we didn't get that. I understand that, but at the same time, they were able to buy players at lower prices as well. So it does work both ways. And you know who that player is. I know who that player is. Why did you sign him in the first place? So I think that should that was more of a recruitment error than anything else. I think they were lucky. Player X, which we can't talk about, unique set of circumstances. I think for the commission to say, well, tough luck, bad luck, I don't think that is particularly helpful. The Usmanov issue and Ukraine, again, we knew that Putin's a madman. We didn't realise he was so much of a madman. And again, to me, that intuitively seems harsh. Why are the Premier League pushing this so high? Well, I don't want to come across as, grassy knoll, no fake moon landings, conspiracy theorist. But the Premier League are desperate to persuade the government that an independent regulator is not required. So therefore, one of the things they're keen to do is to show that they can keep their own house in order. The Manchester City 115 charges. Manchester City didn't know that was going to happen. The first time that Manchester City found out was when they got an affidavit arrived on their front door. So the Premier League are looking at their big picture. They're trying to protect. They're trying to say to the Premier League are persuading the government or trying to persuade the government. You're not needed. We can do it. We've charged Everton. We've charged Forest. We've charged Manchester City, and we're giving them points deductions as well.
Let's touch on that point deduction itself. Obviously, it broke. Everton hit with 10 points, the harshest sanction ever from a Premier League. Impartiality now, you're a Brighton fan. You're a vivid financial expert. You love the finances side of the game. Do you think it was harsh? And if it was harsh, what do you think the punishment should have been?
Okay, I'm a teacher. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not on £5,000 an hour like the QCs are on both sides. But I've read the Commission's version of what was submitted to them, and I think we have to accept in good faith that that's what's been said by all the parties. If you are in breach of the rules, and Everton's initial position was, we think we're on the right side of PSR, then they went away and said, okay, we think we've probably exceeded. And now the argument is, by how much have they exceeded? I think Everton feel they probably exceeded in the region of £7 to £9 million, which is the difference between finishing 16th and 13th in the Premier League. So that could be a point. That could be a couple of points. So the Premier League are saying it's 20 million. You've got to have some form of sanction. So let's go through what they could have done. They could have said, COVID, all these special circumstances, we're going to give you a suspended penalty under those circumstances because this is unique. They could have given the club a fine. The danger if you give them a fine, that sets a precedent. And if I was the owner of another club and I had limitless amounts of money because I'm providing half the world's oil, I would say, okay, I could get a £20 million fine. Bring it on. Because that's just a cost of doing business. So 10 to 20 million pounds, we can, and that would allow other clubs to spend as much money as they want and effectively buy the Premier League. Now, that's what happened with Chelsea. That's what happened to a certain extent with Manchester City. They were able to achieve success in a pre-FFP environment and put rocket boosters onto their club in order to make it successful. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. And if I was a Newcastle fan, you'd absolutely understand where they're coming from. They feel that they've been given a harsh rule. So I think a financial penalty doesn't work if that's your objective, if you want to stop people from coming in. So the next level of sanction is points deduction. I think it does work as a deterrent because it affects things on the pitch. If you're trying to buy success by winning trophies and you've got this as a potential sanction, it does act as a deterrent. 10 points, that intuitively does sound harsh, especially for a first case. Why not have it a lower sanction plus a suspended penalty? If you do this again within the next 2 years, then we're going to we're going to make it harsher. So I think that for me would have felt better, and I'd probably say my gut reaction, I think 6 is enough. That's taking 2 victories away. That hits you.
Yeah, it does.
Suspended penalty, you're on watch. So that's personally where I would have gone. But again, I've not seen the evidence. I'm not a lawyer. As a fan of another club, you see that the club is being penalised. And also, if the situation was reversed, if it had been Leeds who'd done it, or Leicester had done it, and Everton were relegated last season, would you, as an Everton fan, say, well, a financial penalty, that's not harming them. They're still in the Premier League this season. So I think from the perspective of other fans, of other clubs, you want to see that there is going to be some significant sanction. And also, if we take a look at what's happened in the EFL, automatic 12-point penalties for going into administration, 15-point penalty for coming out of administration if you don't pay the creditors, if you stiff your local suppliers. Birmingham City had a 9 points deduction. We've seen Reading have 16 points deducted for a series of misdemeanours. Very much a sort of a totting up procedure, like if you do loads of speeding fines and so on. 10 points for a first offence, to me, seems harsh.
Yeah, we had a lawyer on recently, came onto the show, had a little chat about the sports side of things. And his reaction to it was he thinks Everton were a bit naive approaching the Premier League. You spoke about it before, that they're looking to regulate themselves. They're arguing with the government that they can look after themselves. He feels like Everton went with a carrot to the guinea pig. They kind of went at the wrong time. Do you share that sentiment? Do you think we should have been armed a bit more with lawyers, or have we gone a bit too open book to the Premier League?
Well, again, reading the Commission's report, there was a lot of dialogue between the Premier League and Everton. So I think the club recognised that he had overspent, and it slammed on the brakes.
Yeah.
And it was seeking guidance and seeking approval from the Premier League in relation to a few transactions. Again, looking at the report, at times you got the feeling the Premier League was saying, we really think you shouldn't do this. It's risking things. And Everton took a gamble. And we talk about Everton, we're talking about senior executives. The football club has got an independent identity of the people making the decisions. And I think some of those decisions were, let's gamble because we're confident and we got the decisions right. And those decisions did not materialise in terms of the expected level of success. Remember, Everton budgeted to finish sixth in the Premier League. you're a fan. You know what's happening, on a day-to-day basis in terms of improvements in the squad from recruitment, retention, losing players, and so on. I suspect at the start of the season, when you're all doing, and we all do it, don't we? Yeah, where do you think we're going to finish this season? Yeah, we have your WhatsApp groups, and you all stick a fiver in. How many have you put down sixth?
But not me, but we were top at Boxing Day, weren't we?
Yeah, true.
Or second at Boxing Day, but it all went horribly wrong after that. I think we obviously finished 12th that season. I think it was the Carlo Ancelotti season again. A manager on £12 million a year, Machiri doing it up to his normal tricks and just throwing cash here, there, and everywhere. But many supporters, Kieran, are confused by the Premier League board's meeting on the 10th of August, how they came up with the sanctions specifically for Everton. And the question that's been given is, in your time covering football finance, have you ever seen the Premier League behave in such a way?
No, I haven't. And I think Richard Masters, again, has probably helped Everton to a certain extent here. If the Premier League handbook, and I read it every year, wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
If you go romantic night out with your partner, don't start reading out sections of the Premier League handbook. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's my job as a teacher to become familiar with things like this. It says, in respect of having an independent commission, which is right, you don't want the Premier League making the decisions themselves. In terms of forming the commission has carte blanche to determine an appropriate level of punishment, having heard the evidence. We are not offering any guidance. So if you think about when a judge makes a sentence in respect of a particular crime, they do have guidance. But the Premier League clubs themselves voted to not have guidance rules. So then when Richard Masters pipes up and say, well, actually, we think it should be 6 points plus 1 point for every 5 million over the limit, and you go 6, 7, and then they're 20 million at 10, and they've been 10. You go, is this a coincidence? And of course, it could be a coincidence.
Yeah.
I'm not denying that. And the commission were at length to say, we reached this conclusion independently. The optics, and in football, you're going to come under an awful lot of scrutiny. The optics look poor. And again, I don't think the commission helped themselves by not offering any explanation, because if it had been 8 points or if it had been 6 points or whatever it was going to be, there must have been something which helped them to reach that final decision. You don't just go and get a random number generator and say that's the number of points being deducted. So here I think the commission have not communicated well, they've not presented their judgment well, and you can therefore understand the anger of Everton fans on the back of that.
There's obviously been a lot of noise from governments. We've had Andy Burnham on the channel, Kim Johnson, Ian Burns, Steve Rotham, just to name a few. Even Richard Masters put through in front of the DCMS. Were you quite surprised that there's been so much government pressure? And, they've asked for statements, they've asked for Premier League minutes, they've asked for Richard Masters to be more transparent, especially in the case of Everton. Were you surprised to see so much pushback from the likes of the government and obviously politicians for it to get this far?
We're in an election year. And I don't want to sound overly cynical. The government wants to say that it understands the sport of the nation and the importance of football to the country, and that's part of the reason we're potentially getting an independent regulator, because keeping party politics aside, this is a government which is anti-regulation, it's light government, it's libertarian and so on, and yet it's putting forward a regulator for an industry which historically has not been regulated. So why are they doing that? They're doing that for political reasons. It's to try to shore up a voting support. So I wasn't hugely surprised, because politicians' job is to get support from the public. It's not come from central government. Richard Masters' performance in front of the parliamentary committee, and they are scary things. I've been in a couple myself, and I'm used. I talk for a living, but even so, you're in front of 4 or 5 MPs, and they're firing questions of you. It can be quite an intimidating environment. He didn't express himself well.
You also had an Everton fan right behind him.
She was brilliant. She was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And I thought Rick Parry had him on toast.
Yeah.
And Rick Parry didn't cover himself in glory at times, but compared to Richard Masters, he knew his stuff. Masters appeared to be unprepared, a bit too casual, a bit too complacent, and that didn't cover well. So if I'd been a politician, I'd have been having him in my firing line. So Andy Burnham, I appreciate he's the mayor of Manchester, but I've had Andy Burnham on my podcast when Wigan went into administration, and he is very self-assured. I'd have him as Prime Minister personally.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's for another podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm not surprised. I think it's their responsibility to speak up about this. I don't agree with everything that he's written, but I agree with the broad sentiments.
Obviously, Richard Masters, the Premier League, they've been very open and vocal, using numerous publications to say how independent this commission is. That seems to be the narrative that has been spun by the Premier League. So if it is independent and Everton go to this appeal, which has just finished last Friday, I'm led to believe, if it truly is independent and Everton argue their mitigating factors and if they find certain loopholes, can Everton get points back, do you think?
Yes, they can. I think the fact that we have seen at EFL level, there's been appeals by both Swindon Town and Doncaster Rovers, both of whom were subject to transfer bans covering 3 windows. And both of those appeals have been successful. It's reduced to 1 window plus 1 suspended. The new commission, it can agree with the old one. It's got to consider the evidence. Again, these are people far more experienced in commercial litigation and dispute matters than any of us in this room. And we've got to accept they do have that experience. They're used to hearing evidence. They're used to hearing both sides. And you talk to lawyers about what they do, and I'm sort of old school. You've got to go and follow the due process. But they say no, it's all an act. Yeah, it's all about being persuasive. So it could be that Everton will have lawyers this time who will be able to focus on those areas which do look soft, which do look weak in terms of the decision that was made, such as what formed the basis of the decision, why did you choose to ignore what are very unique circumstances in terms of global pandemic, war in Europe, the specific nature of money was being spent to try to make Everton more competitive in the Premier League, but not until 2025 when the new stadium comes on board, and also the benefit to the city as a whole of having a bigger stadium, which can have a social and environmental benefit for employment, welfare, and so on.
Supporters across the country, not just Everton, Wolves have obviously raised a lot of concerns about the PSR rules. Their argument is, how on earth can a club, like Wolves, like Everton, probably like Nottingham Forest, I know Brighton yourself, probably the best run club in the Premier League at the moment, how can teams like this now compete against, we spoke about it commercially, the size of your United, your Liverpools, your Man Cities, who they've got their own problems internally. How can clubs compete? Because it's very rare that we find like a Leicester City. That was a freak year that will probably never happen again for a long time. How can these clubs compete with these, let's be honest, commercial monsters?
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, well, I'm in my 60s, so I'm old enough to remember Derby County, Leeds United, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, Everton themselves, Blackburn Rovers, Leeds United. And yes, you had some clubs that were dynasties, and we know who, there was one club that was dominant in the 80s, I forget who they were. But there was at the start of each season, and it was not unusual for someone like Ipswich to finish as runners-up. And that was great growing up. Yeah. And yes, there were some clubs that were intuitively bigger than others in terms of having a bigger support base. But what we have seen is that since the creation of the Premier League, those clubs have become global brands. And Everton is still a city club.
It is, definitely, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Because if you're a city club, and I talk to people from different clubs in different countries as well, people say, well, I just support Brighton. I said, it wasn't my choice. The club chooses you. You grow up there, or your dad was a fan, and the dad took you along at the age of 8, your first ever trip, and you saw the floodlights and the colour of the shirt and the colour of the grass and the chanting, and that's it. You've got that lifelong commitment. Whereas and again, this isn't a criticism, because what the Premier League has done in terms of success it's gone overseas. You know that if you're growing up in Scandinavia or Ireland or certain parts of Asia or Africa, everybody in your town, everybody in your school supports one of 2 clubs. Well, you're not going to turn around and say, well, I'm not going to support them or Manchester United. I'm going to support Everton, or I'm going to support Crystal Palace, or I'm going to support Bournemouth, because everybody wants to be accepted. Yeah. Everybody and what you do if you want to be accepted, you follow everybody else. And on the back of that, and these clubs happened to be in the right place at the right time, because if the Premier League had been formed in the early to mid 80s, then Everton would have been one of those clubs, because they were one of the top dogs in English football. So it was a case of right club at the right time. Manchester United, remember, didn't win anything between 1968 and 1993, so they went 25 years without winning. If the Premier League had been formed 10 years earlier, then Everton would be competitive as one of the big 6. So how do clubs like that accelerate forwards? The answer is they cannot. And like it or lump it, we have to accept that a good season for one of our clubs is to get into the Europa League or to have a good cup run. And I think that's absolutely depressing. The media aren't bothered, because the media are interested in clicks, and you know which clubs get the most clicks, so they want those clubs to win. I had a meeting with some broadcasters a few years ago, and I was talking to somebody from Sky and said, Leicester City must have been absolutely fantastic for you. They said, we had our worst year in terms of viewing figures that we've had for a decade, because they still want to watch you know who and you know who. And I don't know about you, I was delighted for Leicester. I've got no affection for the club at all. Brilliant management, played really good football as well, and it gives you hope. That when it gets to the start of August and you think, okay, we'll probably finish 12th, but couple of new signings might work, and we might get to 9th, and then for them to do that, it gave you. So it's a bit like believing in Father Christmas all over again. And for any young people listening, he does exist.
Well, it's like me. I think I'm now 32 and I've seen us finish top 4 once. So that 5,000 to 1 bet that lucky man put on when Leicester won the league. I wish I was him. But moving on to the second appeal, Everton have now been referred again to an independent commission following another alleged breach. There's been a lot of terminology used regards to double jeopardy in sports law. Were you surprised to see Everton charged again alongside Nottingham Forest?
I wasn't surprised about Nottingham Forest because I had done the sums, and I got interviewed by one of the national newspapers about 10 days before the announcement came out, and they said, who do you think it's going to be? And I stuck my neck out and said Forest, and I got the appropriate level of abuse that you'd expect to get on the back of that, and that goes with the territory. Forest had overspent, and I think Forest acknowledge that they've overspent. They are asking for specific mitigating factors to say, it's our first year in the Premier League. Everton are allowed £105 million loss. Manchester City are allowed 100, Chelsea are allowed. We're only allowed 61, because the way that the system works is that you're assessed on 3 years. For every year in the Premier League, you're allowed to lose 35. For every year in the Championship, you're allowed to lose 13. So it's our first season in the Premier League, so 35 plus 13. So we're at a disadvantage. The previous season, we got promoted on the bunch of loan players. Yeah. So we arrived in the Premier League with, 2 men and a dog and a photo of Brian
I think it was 13 or 14 players they had, which is just ridiculous.
And therefore we had to sign. And we panicked and we just signed anybody that was available. And yes, we've overspent, but we've tried to cut back since then. And look, we've sold Brennan Johnson in the window. But people are going, hold on, your financial year end was the 30th of June, and you sold Brennan Johnson on the 1st of September, and he's already played 3 games for you in the Premier League. So if they're going to try to backdate that, and if that is accepted, that sets a precedent which I think every other club could then use to appeal any sanctions.
Well, Everton with Richarlison had to sell him, didn't he?
Yeah,
to Tottenham?
and there's a case. And if you take a look at what Forest said, they said we were offered 30 million for Brennan Johnson on the 30th of June, similar to Everton accepting 60 million for Richarlison on the 30th of June. And we decided to give them 2 fingers and hold on, and they ended up getting 40 million by holding on to the end of the window. Now, if Everton had been able to do the same with Richarlison and sell him for, say, 80 million, and again, if you look at the Commission's report, Everton did make specific reference to that, and okay, the player isn't named, but we all know who the player is, then that £20 million would have taken Everton down to a 0 figure in terms of a breach, and therefore they wouldn't be facing a penalty at all. So there's that. In the case of Everton, it does seem double jeopardy in the sense that they are already being penalised for 21-22 and 2021 in terms of the first points deduction of 10 points. So then to be given then a second charge. Now, it could be that the commission that's looking at this will say, we're going to give you a points deduction, but we're going to reduce it by 2/3 because you've already had punished those 2 years. So, that's one course of action, and therefore it could be that Forest will have a more significant points deduction than Everton on the back of that. But, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a teacher.
Yeah, definitely. Another topic that keeps on continuously coming up is this Super League. It's back again in the news. A lot of clubs are pushing, especially the likes of Real Madrid, and other clubs are trying to push towards that. Can you see something like that coming into football? Because this is all about revenue now, isn't it? Clubs just want more and more money, don't they?
It depends how many concessions clubs get from UEFA. If we take a look at the original Super League, if you talk or if you listen to Andrea Agnelli, who was the former president of Juventus before they had some very interesting financial issues, who was also the best man, or it was the godfather, wasn't he, of Seferin's kid. He'd shook on a deal in terms of how the UEFA Champions League was going to go forwards. At the same time, he was working behind the back with all of these other Super League clubs. What clubs want is 2 things. As you rightly said, Ben, they want to maximise the money coming in, and they want to minimise risk. And what's the biggest risk in football? The biggest risk in football is not qualifying for the Champions League. So by having a competition in which Real Madrid could be relegated from La Liga but still play in the Champions League or the Super League is perfect from their point of view.
Yeah.
And as far as the Premier League is concerned, we've got an additional problem. 6 into 4 doesn't go. We know that Barcelona, a bad season for Barcelona and Real Madrid is being runners-up.
Yeah.
Or third if Atleti have a really good season. But in the Premier League, we've got to acknowledge it is a wee bit more competitive. That's why there were 6 clubs from the Premier League, because not qualifying for the Premier League is probably going to cost you somewhere in the region of 50 to 60 million quid. And this year, Chelsea haven't made it, Liverpool haven't made it, Spurs haven't made it, and their owners are unhappy. And none of their owners are football fans. Todd Bowley's not a football fan. FSG aren't football fans. I think they're very good at what they do.
I think they're very good at owners, unfortunately.
They're very good. And that's they're very good in terms of analytics. They're very, very good in terms of finance. Some of the stuff that I see, which gets leaked to me from various snitches, is absolutely top drawer.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of professional admiration, but project big picture. It would have been a nightmare for Everton. Clubs would have been allowed to sell their own home TV rights, only need 6 votes to change the constitution of football, get rid of 3 up, 3 down as we know it, reduce the size of the Premier League, which is a disaster for Everton.
Definitely,
and we've still got that narrative. If you go back to the parliamentary committee report, Rick Parry saying, we should have a smaller Premier League. Well, okay, well, how are you going to be better off as an Everton fan with 4 less fixtures a year? Same for Villa, same for same for West Ham, and so on. You go, well, how's that going to be? Why is that? It's to allow the bigger clubs to play more teams, more matches in Europe, and to have a longer period in the summer when they go on those pre-season tours, and they're charging £5 million a match for a present, for somebody to turn up and do a glorified training session. It was all geared towards the bigger clubs making more money, and the other clubs being patted on the head, patronised, and say, yeah, you can play us twice a year, we'll be kind enough to you, but you're never going to win anything on the back of it.
Yeah, definitely. Another club that found themselves in difficulty, Manchester City, 115 charges from the Premier League. Dick Masters has said a date now has been set for Manchester City to obviously hear their appeal and their commission. What punishments are we expecting them to receive? Because I understand it's a lot different to Everton's. I get it. It's a lot more in regards to sponsorship, stuff like that. I think there's one in regards to the grass being a different length or some sort of madness. But what do we expect in regards to Manchester City's issues?
Well, we are now at the 1-year anniversary of those charges being levelled. And I remember I was on a train heading up to Liverpool as it came through. And by the time I'd left Euston and got to Liverpool, I'd had 8 phone calls from various journalists and TV and radio and stuff to try to explain what's going on. I think the Premier League's actually shot itself in the foot, because as soon as I got up here, I spoke to a lawyer, and they said, well, this is great for Manchester City, because if the Premier League's got 115 charges, then the lawyers have got to go and put together 115 defences, and that's going to take a lot of time. That's going to probably take 2 years. So the first thing to say is we're not going to hear anything before 2025.
Yeah.
And it could easily be third quarter 2025 before we do hear. So he says that a date's been set. But even once the commission has been given the evidence, and if you take a look at Everton's case, 40,000 documents were submitted.
Wow.
In respect of one
case.
set of 3-year charges. Can you imagine how many documents have got to be scrutinised? If you've got a photocopy of business in Manchester, you're absolutely made up, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely.
So there's going to be so it's going to take a long time, and then the commission has to go away and determine guilty or not guilty, and an appropriate level of charges. We can effectively condense those 115 charges down to 3. First of all, they've artificially inflated income. So money has come in from the owners, and they've pretended that it's been sponsorship income. So that's one set of charges. Secondly, they've artificially hidden costs. So one of the accusations, and we don't know whether this is true or not, was that Roberto Mancini had a contract of employment with Manchester City to coach them. He was on 1.8 million a year, and he also had a consultancy contract to coach another club in Abu Dhabi for 3 days a year for another 1.8 million. Now look, you and I, Ben, we go there for 3 days and we do a bit of keepy uppies and five-a-side for 1.8 million. Sign me up. I have no issue with that person, and also if they've declared it to the tax authorities, paid tax on it, the individual has done nothing wrong. It doesn't look good, does it? So that's, and the third accusation is that Manchester City has not cooperated with the Premier League. Manchester City's defence to that is, well, why should I? If somebody accuses me of doing anything, well, I'm not going to assist the person trying to prosecute me, especially as a number of Premier League clubs, including, I think Burnley was one of them, had written to the Premier League and said, throw the book at them. You go into sort of bunker mentality. It's us against the world. So I thought that was a harsh one. If Manchester City are found guilty, what is this effectively saying? It's saying that there has been corporate fraud at executive level, or corporate misrepresentation at a corporate level, at senior level. I cannot see how anybody at the board level of Manchester City can keep their job, because you've done so. So it would be quite seismic in terms of those people. In terms of the penalties, I think we'd be looking, if they're found guilty on 115, I think we'd be looking at a minimum of a 25 to 30 point deduction. Worst case scenario, they get demoted, we saw what happened with Juventus. We've seen what's happened with Rangers in Italy and Scotland. So that could be, a pretty nuclear option, and that will have ramifications. I can't see Phil Foden Tuesday night at Crawley Town. I don't know about you.
No, definitely not. I just want to know who Mancini's was. That contract sounds definitely interesting. I'll do a podcast out there for 1.9 million if they want. Just another topic now. It's the Bobble that's kindly messaged him because he knows I'm interviewing you. He's just sent me a text and he wants to ask you, fans have never had more opportunity of being part of and close to their clubs, but probably never felt more disenfranchised from a game that they don't recognise with TV, to shifting games, kick-off times, being priced out of watching games in stadiums and on TV, VAR ruining games, and snakes and ladders Premier League product that sees points won and lost in courtrooms and not on the pitch. How do you, Kieran, see the relationship between fans and the game in the future? And it's a great question, but I have to read it out because it was quite a long one.
I think we will be monetised, patronised and treated as consumers. And the danger is, if we don't like it, the clubs will take the view that there's people who will come and replace us. And that's certainly the view taken by the bigger clubs. So the football romantic, since I started doing this sort of football finance job, I have become really disillusioned. Do I still love my club as something that I'm proud to be associated with? Yes, because you can't stop. It's a bit like your kids. At times you really don't like them, but you always love them. Yeah. And that part, but yeah, I'm sort of browbeat. I only see it going one way. The American investors, and this is not an anti-American comment, the hedge funds, the private equity companies, those people see football as an industry where ticket prices are too cheap, because they're selling every ticket at every match. 98.8% capacity in the Premier League last season. That's incredible. Well, we need to increase prices too. Clearly, we're not, and we know at some clubs there are waiting lists, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people to get season tickets. Let's keep increasing the prices until we've squeezed them. So it's only going to head in one direction. The hedge funds and the private equity funds, we don't know who's behind them. They've got no love of football. They've got no understanding of the history and the heritage and the pride that comes from being an Everton fan or a Manchester United fan or a Newcastle United fan or a Brighton Hove Albion fan or a Macclesfield Town fan. They just see the bottom line. And that's the way that football is going. Football is now part of the entertainment industry. It's not seen as a sport in its own right. And those people behind those institutions, they see the financial success of the NBA and the NFL and so on, and they want to replicate that. If you saw the ticket prices for the Super Bowl and so on,
wow,
that makes an FA Cup final ticket very, very cheap in comparison. Let's squeeze them. In fact, why are we having the FA Cup final at Wembley? We could have it at Riyadh. We could sell it out to a bunch of celebs. We could have Taylor Swift as the halftime entertainment. Let's get rid of these 45-minute halves, because it's 45 minutes between adverts. So let's have it as 4 quarters, as Perez wanted in Super League. Enjoy every minute of football as it is, because it ain't going to get any better.
Yeah, definitely. And another topic someone's asked with regards to Nottingham Forest, they obviously got charged and then continue to spend. We've seen them continue to spend. The owners continue to back them. Do you think that's clever? Do you think it's a bit naive for them? Do you think they're expecting a points deduction? They're going to try and fight their way out of it by bringing in players? I couldn't really work it out because Everton have just shut up shop, closed the doors, not open for business. We're not doing anything now while this is all ongoing. Well, it seems that Nottingham Forest, they've gone the other way.
They do have a little bit more wiggle room in 23-24 because they've now got 2 years of Premier League at 35 million plus 1 year of the Championship. So their FFP limit has gone from 61 million to 83. So I think they've probably got a little bit more financial flexibility. They have sold some players have left. So I think theirs is more due to the fact that they feel they've got perhaps a greater degree of financial latitude than Everton, rather than we're going to double down and come out fighting.
in regards to the Premier League, we spoke about at the very beginning of the podcast, obviously they're talking about re-energising this £105 million limit. And if it had been in line with inflation that you quite rightly talked about, Everton would be in line and we'd be in the clear. Going forward then, how do they go off that? How do they react to the inflation? How do they react to the wages, the cost of obviously the football game? We spoke about it then in regards to TV rights going through the roof, money going through the roof. Where there's money, there's power, to say the least. How can the Premier League continue to keep up to date with this move in times? Because it's going to go in one way at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I think there was a case for having a natural step up on an annual basis. I mean, we do that in terms of tax. Your personal allowance goes up every year on the basis of inflation. If you're a pensioner, you get the triple lock, which increases your pension. So it can be done in other parts of the world. If they move to this soft wage cap going forwards, which is if you've qualified for Europe, it's 70% of income. If you've not qualified for Europe, it's 85% of income. If that is the case, if your income goes up by 10 million, then your wage, your squad control limit goes up by 70% or 80% of that figure. So it's built in to the proposed changes, which I think from Everton's point of view, you say, well, hold on, if you're going to build it in from going from 2024 onwards, surely there should be a degree of latitude that it didn't increase between 2013 and 2024.
Final question, and it's probably the biggest question I'm going to ask you today. The appeal is now finished.
Yeah.
We're due to probably hear something in the next couple of weeks. Do you think we can get any points back? Or do you think we will get points back?
I think if Everton's council have put forward a persuasive case, which has looked at the potential flaws in how the decision was made, then a reduction in the number of points could easily be on the cards. How much? I think it would be a reduction from 10 to 6. If the lawyers decide to double down, are they going to form a gang together? I don't think. I don't think that is the case. I think they do. I know a lot has been accusations being made that the commission is not independent. These are very experienced people. And again, talking to some of the senior sports lawyers who I'm sort of on good terms with, they say, if you look at my back history, I've represented 35 clubs in the EFL and the Premier League, and so's my mate there, and so's my mate. To find somebody who has not represented either Everton or Leeds or Leicester or Southampton or any club that potentially could be affected by this is impossible. We are there to use our experience and to be objective, but I think there are some weaknesses in the way that, as a layperson, I'm a pub lawyer. Pub lawyer, no qualifications. I think that there is the case for a reduction in the level of penalty.
And there we have it, ladies and gents. What an absolute brilliant podcast. Great guest with Kieran Maguire. Make sure you tune into all his podcasts and make sure you follow him on Twitter. Very knowledgeable. I treat your word of God as gospel. You're the first one to call out Everton's points. Even though the club were telling us different, you doubled down and stuck by your word that we were going to get charged. And here we are talking about it. And there we have it, ladies and gents. Another podcast. In the meantime, stay safe. All the very best and up the toffees.